So I'll introduce myself briefly. I started two companies that grew. First one I started in 1999, a company who did cross-border payments, and we took it public in NASDAQ in 2014, and then it was sold out of the market into a company called Pitney Bowes. In 2005, the person that had sales replaced me at Borderfree, and I started Payoneer, which I'm still part of and the president. So between those two companies, I've seen most of the horrors and mistakes and issues and sales situations that most of you will follow as you start your business. The purpose of my presentation is to speak more about if we are here, how do you even get to a place where what Reuven mentioned, how do you even get to the place where you can actually apply for, ask for request for information, whatever, request for proposal, there's always the name of the big companies. So I will speak about this, the early stage, and how do you get from here to here. Sometimes people, people got to the moon, but how do you get to the moon, right? So that's kind of the phase, so feel free to ask questions about as I go through it. I will talk about two types of fintech companies in my presentation, which is companies that touch the money and companies that provide services to companies that touch the money. So obviously banks touch the money, and then all the fraud screening, all the support, all the wire technologies, companies are servicing companies that touch the money. Both Payoneer and Borderfree are companies that touch the money, and there's a difference. Right? If you touch the money, then you are subject to a lot of there's so much mess around it, so it's much more, I guess, complex, but typically the size of the company can be bigger. So the likelihood of a company who provides technologies to banks and to financial services is higher versus companies that will actually touch the money and then will succeed. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. Maybe you can push it, but obviously, PayPal is bigger than most of technology companies who provide services to PayPal or to Deutsche Bank. So that's the logic. So I will speak first about the companies that touch the money, and this is Payoneer is one of them. And when you talk about sales, and you are now a company that touch the money, and there's people here from Rewire that touch the money, there's a whole bunch of companies that touch the money. When you touch the money, the first thing that comes to your advantage when you go to sell is to understand the limitation and the challenges that banks have, because you know your competition. You know who you compete with. You compete with very large institutions that have very complex software from the 70s that cannot move fast, that have regulation challenges, and what they mostly, this is very, very important when you compete with banks, and you're not a bank, there's no way anyone here is starting a bank, unless he's insane. So if you are competing with banks, the banks they have capital ratio. They can take deposits from all kind of people and give it to someone else. That's how they make the money. Everything else is secondary to that option. So you know the limitation of the companies that you compete with. And that's by far the single biggest element of how you compete with banks and winning bids on financial institution when you touch the money, right? So, for example, there's a niche of payments that the banks don't want to touch. They can do it. It just for them, it's noise, it's complex, it's headline risk, and I'll tell you in a minute what Payoneer did, which is exactly that niche we got, right? So, the leftover of banks can feed many, many families. If that's one line, if you want to think of your business model, if you are fed by the leftover that the banks leave behind, you should be able to make a very nice business. So what is Payoneer doing? And I'll tell about the sales of Payoneer. So banks can also move money between countries. That's already there for many, many years, and they typically use the SWIFT network, the wire. And I think Bank Hapoalim, who is here, have an office in Lud, and they have people who sit there for years, and they get all the BIN, all this IBAN, whatever, it's like 16 digits of all kind of chutzkunim that you need to put in the wire. And then nobody knows what's the exact, just to send a wire, it's a big headache. It's a half an hour and your phone call, and it's really, so we took that part of why is it so complex to move money between countries. We made it simpler and we made it much, much cheaper. The banks don't necessarily like it, because if you move and you look at e-commerce, right? E-commerce is by definition global. But if you go to your bank and you want to move money to Pakistan or to Bangladesh or to India or to China, it's a real, whoa, 1 second. It's like completely out of the comfort zone. And that's exactly what we took. So we took something that the banks don't necessarily like, they don't make a lot of money on, it's really old, it's inefficient, and we made it efficient. That's the business model we did. And as e-commerce grew, we did it better and better and better, right? So if you look at the example of Airbnb, which is one of our really important customers, so they need to pay homeowners all over the world. Chile, Paraguay, right? So then you have a lot of countries, Germany, Asia, anywhere. And if you go to a bank and you tell the bank, I need to send 70,000 wires, and these are all the countries, these are all the information, then the bank typically not set up to be able to do those kind of, the number of transactions, not even 20. Most banks. Maybe Magapolim have a very good CTO, so they'll get there, but most banks don't know how to do it. So we took that niche, right? So again, going to the logic, that's what we did. Now I'll talk about the sales technique of Pioneer, right? So we have Airbnb on the one hand, and they wouldn't talk to us because we are too small and we're too insignificant, we live in the Middle East. So Airbnb wouldn't talk to us. I said, fine, don't talk to us. And then we did a trick, and we went and we opened an account. Now bear with me for a second because this is it's a little bit mechanic, but it's important for the discussion. We went to a bank and we opened an account that instead of 6 digits, typically the account number is 6 digit or 9 digit, we asked them to give us just 2 digits and everything else is ours, right? So if it's Bank Poalim, it was, let's say it's 012, right? And then you have the account number, so anything beyond 0 and 2 and then start with 1 is ours, right? So it's kind of play with, in Israel, Masav, in the US it's ACH, in Germany it would be Gyro, in the UK it would be Bucks. You play with the format, and it's still just mechanics. But then we gave to the homeowners our account number, which was randomly selected over there. So we started to get money from, basically they went to Airbnb, Airbnb sent the money to the account that we gave to those people in Chile, and then we got the money to our account at Bank of America, and then we moved the money to Chile with PayPal or with cards or with ACH, whatever we find the ways to do it. So what happened, this for the sales is important, what happened is we become customers of Airbnb without Airbnb even knowing who we are. And then we asked for the meeting because the people who got the money from us into Chile and Paraguay, those are the first 2 countries, told Airbnb, we like Pioneer, we actually prefer to use them because it was cheap and obviously we knew what we were doing, it was not naive. But we created enough satisfaction within the people who got the money that they created a buzz within Airbnb and then they met us, right? So from a sales cycle, when you can, and you have 2 sides of the equation to sell, you create a very empathetic, you create a much easier way of creating a buzz. It saves a lot of meetings and bids and RFPs, right? You just create a situation, you go and you tell Airbnb, we just want to tell you we haven't got married yet, but we are pregnant, right? That's kind of the logic, right? And we did it many, many times, and you get better in this, and you create the leverage from both sides. We're not the first company who did it, and it's not something I invented, but when you can create a demand and request, then you're much better off, right? This is in the sales cycle. This is strategic to how to even plan the selling. I will go to so this is the mechanics. There is, it depends on the model, but there is such thing as called network effect, right? So when you create Bit or Pepper in Israel, then Bank Hapoalim almost immediately created a beautiful application, I must say, in any standard, most globally. When you have a captured audience and they download the application, by definition, anyone you want to send money to, you send the money when he gets an SMS and you download the application. That creates a network effect. So you get to hundreds of thousands of downloads pretty quickly, right? It's still confined within Bank Hapoalim, of course, but even not, right? So Bank Discount doesn't really have it, or whatever, Bank Yigul, whatever, Bank Otzar Chayal don't have it. So you create a network pretty quickly, and then you can actually give incentive to people to join Bank Hapoalim. So you have a network effect. Not always you can do it, but if you can get into a situation where you create network effect, the whole sales cycle is very different. When you don't have a network effect, like in remittance, when you need to send money to Eritrea, whoever those guys are, you have to find the people one by one every single time, which costs money. That's acquisition cost, and they can switch. This can switch someone else very quickly. So even if you choose to pay the acquisition cost, you better have something to keep them, create some kind of stickiness, right? Either you have agreement, whatever it is, and I'm not going to go into specific market, but you have to have something beyond cost of acquisition. Otherwise, you will run out of money, and it's going to be, right? So Kulu, that's an application in Tel Aviv, Kulu, right? So Kulu is giving discounts. And at some point, they're either going to create a very nice network, or they're going to run out of money that was paid by Supercell, right? So again, I don't know them very well, but they raise a lot of money, and they use the buzz of the ICO, but they're buying people with money, basically. You give discounts, and you create a network. If they manage to get this network beyond the point of just using the discounts, then they win. If they don't, then they just wasted a lot of money by giving discounts, right? And that's, the jury's out. Bank Hapoalim and Bank Leumi, an example of Israel, have a much, much wider distribution, and if they choose to do what Kulu is doing, then they can instantly acquire millions of people with accounts, right? So that's kind of, it's an example. Again, I don't know Kulu, and I respect him for the achievements, but the question from a network, creating a network effect perspective is important. This is for the sales. It's very tempting to show that you have a lot of customers, but if you buy the customers, you did nothing, right? Again, this is also important when you go to sales. Sometimes you start a company, we just had a discussion before, and you start a company and you want to be big, and you go to investors, and the investor wants to see how you become a billion-dollar company. But you don't have a billion-dollar company, you have a niche. You can service a specific niche, film producers, whatever, okay. In our case, we serviced marketplaces in 2005. There was just 3 marketplaces in 2005. But you service a niche. So this is I would say it's not logical, it's empirical experience. Even if you service a niche, leadership within a niche have a huge premium. And those niches tends to be bigger than you think. So I wouldn't, you can actually go and you have experience from coming from a certain industry, and you can just service this industry, and you have the contacts, I wouldn't worry so much about it's too small, let's go, how do I go to other niches? Do the niche first. You should be surprised of how big and deep it gets. It's typically when you find a market, it's bigger than you think, and it's going to take longer than you think. That's kind of, it's empirical, it's not logical, it's just the way I experience things so far. And I'm quoting Bill Gates, so I feel comfortable to stand behind it. Right? So I think that the niche it's not a dirty word, it's fine, you can be proud of it when you talk to investors. I wouldn't be worried too much about the market size and all that stuff. Right, so I would say 90% of the companies we service today didn't exist when we started the company. And you have to assume that that's going to be the trend, right? So if you start a company now, fintech will be very different 5 and 10 years from now than it is now. So you have to aim to where the missile going to hit in this Kippat Barzel thing, right? Where is it? And it's just the way it is, right? So that's why it's important to believe in a trend. Sales in the beginning, and this is important, right? So you start a company, and then so we started Pioneer, and kind of the logic is we go to those companies, we ask them, you send the money to us, we will send it to your pays overseas. And the first question that is in the air, it's a huge elephant in the air, is like, why would you trust you? Who the fuck are you? And fuck is a very, very useful word in many of those situations. In the English literature, there's a very special room for the word. And then you need to create, that's academy, right? I can say fucking. So right? So there's the issue of how do you get to the, why would you send the money to, who are you? And you're not even a VC backed, like why would you send the money? And I have no good answer, but they do. And so it would bring you to the next question, next point is, bring it up. Tell them, you must ask yourself, why would you send the money to me? And trust me that I will actually send the money back to the OPEs. then give me a try. Send small amount. Give me a shot, right? Most company that starts and touch the money needs some kind of a first adopter to give them a chance. And people do. I don't know why, but they do. And it's most of those situations are still built on trust. When you ask me why they actually do it, they probably should. When you use a small fintech company and you look at the entrepreneurs in the eyes and you see the team in front of you, you know that they're accountable, you know who they are, you're much more likely to not be disappointed with them than with a bank that you have no visibility over their capital ratio and over the things that you just don't know. You don't know how many fishermen they have behind the investment that they did. So in kind of in an awkward way, it's easier to trust people that you actually see in front of you. But so if that's a concern, it's just going to be okay. You'll find someone that's going to trust you, then you have one customer, then you have two customers, and slowly that's going to build up, and then you're going to have a VC or some kind of investor that have reputation, and then you can bounce from there. Okay? But that's also really, really important. That's kind of how do you even start yeah. Another thing with sales in early stage, and this is, if there's one thing you can take from here, take this one as an early stage company. When you go and you meet the Amazons, and you meet big companies who's willing to meet you, and you don't sleep 3 days before the meetings because you know that this meeting can change your world, don't waste too much time on elephants, really, right? Because many of those companies have all the time in the world to meet all the startups, to know about innovation and stuff. They need to fill up their calendar with meetings with startups. They need to report to their bosses how many companies they met. They have all the time in the world, and you have expiration date. You know when you did. You have so much money, and you have so much budget, and there's a date when the money's run out, and you're finished. They don't. That's create a very, very significant imbalance. So all the big meetings, I would be very careful. I wouldn't say Amazon beg you to go. It's okay, you should go, right? But I wouldn't count on those big companies to give you the first chance. Cinderella happens in fairy tales. It can happen when you're ready, when you can actually service them. And this is tricky because I see a lot of companies wasting a lot of time on potentially very large customers, which then, may or may not happen. And then the guy moved the position, so there's a new guy. There's a whole, I'm sure others have seen it. It's just that when you have so much budget and you're not profitable, you need to be really, really careful with how you spend the time. Right, so the conclusion from this is, when you need to sell and you are early stage, the choices where you spend the time and energy are the choices it's going to make whether you're going to live or not. Whether the meeting have a merits, right? This is like, think of, I will be politically incorrect, right? So this is like, I take a chance here, okay? If the analogy is dating, you need to figure out this is a marriage material or not, okay? I'm gonna see kids from this situation, or this is just a waste of time. That's the analogy, okay? It could have been worse, but I'm saving you from all the other, right? But this is like, think of that, right? So you have so much money. This is it. You need to create a momentum. I will use another analogy, which is, there's a book called Crossing the Chasm, which is, you may want to read at some point. And it basically said that it's like a jungle. You go from one tree to another with like Tarzan, and if you jump from one tree to another tree, you're fine. If you don't get to another tree, then you don't have enough momentum to go back to the first tree. So now, you swing until you get to the point, and then you fall and the crocodiles eat you. But if you don't, and you try to kick, and you try to do a lot of noise, then the whole forest knows you're going to die. So there's right? So it's kind of, and that's from the book. So there's basically, you have one shot to go to another tree. Choose the other tree very carefully to make sure you get to the other tree. Right? And that's, I cannot stress this enough, how many times I've seen companies wasting trips and money and flights and weeks and presentation and hope in another meeting on something that they should have, if they knew the dynamic within the large corporation, they would not take the chance. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So I'll go to psychology in a minute, but I said I divide the fintech companies to companies who touch the money and don't touch the companies. So I'll speak a little bit about companies who who don't touch the money. So everything is reversed. So now the banks are your customers, and you need to be the nicest to them, and you need to spend as much time with banks as possible. So I'm sitting on a few boards of companies who provide services to companies, to large e-commerce companies or banks. And over there's two things that, and over there it's just very different dynamic, right? You don't need to build trust. You don't need to give it. You need to be able to go with a very, very, very deep technology. You know that all the banks now are hungry for, I'm just giving the dynamics, hungry for external technologies. The dynamic is often that the banks, especially in compliance and risk, prefer to use a third-party company so they don't take the blame, right? So let's say that the bank approved the transaction. It happens to be that the transaction is part of a laundry scheme. It's much better that the approval happened by external company, not by the banks, because if the bank approved it, then the bank is being suspicious of actually called willful blindness, that the bank ignored it because he wanted to make money. So you have a lot of situations that banks needs and will use many external technology companies. This is a very refreshing change for the fintech industry and gave a lot of boost for many, right? So it's to compliance and payments mechanisms and fraud detection and all kind of phishing detection, all this range of companies. So in this case, technology, team, background is crucial. I'm also here for a question in between before I move on. Any questions so far? Anyone hear me? One second. Yeah, good. Yeah. When you start a company, again, I'm still in the early stage, and we are, and there's a question how to get to the big stage. I'm not worried about how you get much bigger. At this stage, if you get 5, 6, 10 customers, from there to be big, the road is much simpler. So let's talk about, again, I'll go back to the early stage. How do you get the first customer? And over there, I would do anything to get the first few reference accounts. So it's really personal. People buy from people. As I said before, people trust people. And once someone gave you a chance, I would do everything to get them to be happy. I would hold the hand, Hans, whatever, with the Dutch guy. I would hold the hand, make everything overnight, make it cheap, lose money, anything so the customer is happy. I would make sure that inside the company, when you got a chance, everybody is really geared to make sure that the whole experience is nice. If he send email on Friday night, you answer Friday night, of course. Okay? They don't know what Saturday is. I just give you a sense, right? So so we had a customer in India, and I went to India to meet them, and we had the meetings after the meetings. We kind of just drank or whatever food, and I said I live in Israel, and we had a whole discussion about culture. They never heard of Jews ever. They knew there's Muslim and Christian, just never heard of Judaism. That's how far things are, and you cannot say it's Saturday or it's Yom Kippur. You just can't. You have to be ready. So Yom Kippur with the extremes, so have someone in the US answer. But you need to be able to be responsive. You need to genuinely, within the culture of the company, be able to respond and make sure that whoever gave you a chance will be a reference. And I will jump again. You will make mistakes. You will have fuck-ups. Take responsibility. Really important. I fucked up. It's not going to happen again. All the damage I will cover. I'm sorry. And then when you fuck up and you recover from it, it's becoming from a customer to a relationship. Almost any mistakes managed well can get the situation from a smooth service, just not interesting, into a company that I really like, because they take responsibility and because they really, really care, because they go out of the way to make sure that if there's a mistake, they fix it. That makes the relationship much, much stronger. The phrase that every crisis is an opportunity for something bigger, it's true in many of those situations. So I would take responsibility, talk about it, not try to hide it, be as transparent as possible. Really, really important. So let's talk about psychology for a little bit. Right? So obviously I went to hundreds, if not thousands, of sales meetings, and there is So there's, as I think I'll repeat, right, so the first thing is this trust. Right, so they need to trust you this is about in all fintech, they need to trust you that you're not going to embarrass them. If they choose to work with you, they're not going to feel stupid. But on the personal level, even if you're going to have mistakes, they know what they're going to get into. So the trust is really, really important, and there are many ways to build trust. And I would go back to the dating analogy. You kind of know by the Tinder already if it's serious or not, right? So you kind of know, right? So there's all those micro expressions, all those little discussions, the chit chats, how serious and how committed the person in front of you to make it work. So it's critical. And then you go into teamwork. You typically go to those meetings when they need to decide, you go with the team. And in many ways, and this again, it's also because of who you compete with, but you go with the team. And sometimes the team works so well together. This is the case, right? So this is the situation that you want to go to. That the other side, let's say you go and we had a meeting with Amazon. So we did get Amazon many years after we met them the first time. And when we left the meeting, what they said is, we met obviously all those banks and this is a team we want to work with. Whatever it is, that's the team that we want to work with. This is the team that's going to take care of this account much more than any commercial large bank. We want to work with those people. And sometimes just because the people complement each other's sentence, sometimes because the people have so much respect between each other, sometimes they just play the game so nice as a team that you get a feeling that there's something solid about this group. And Israelis are very good at that, to create those teamworks, because you go and you have a mission and you accomplish it. So kind of, there's something about the intangible asset, the psychological side of you got the meeting, you want to leave an impact in the meeting in such a way that whatever it is, even if it's not going to work now, we're going to remember this team and we're going to work with them at some point in the future. Super, super important. Look at the teamwork. Yeah. So I would say that the trust comes with something that next to it, which is respect. They need to trust you and they need to respect you. Right? With trust and respect, you can get pretty far. And the respect comes from either your background, or the stories, or the technology you build, or how you manage to get. I mean, whatever it is, everybody has its own style, but create trust and respect. Those are the two things, as an individual and as a team. Not all of you are starting companies, so you're part of a team. So, kind of that's the logic. And it's really basic, and it's really just, if you follow this, you should be able to be fine. Yep. Yeah. There's issue with transparency. Also, transparency create both respect and trust. Transparency also when you look at pricing. So what I've done in the initial deals with pricing, you go and say this is, and I'm finishing with the question, is this is the price. This is what I pay. This is my cost. This is what it costs. This is how much I want to make. Let's talk about it. Right? So if outside of Israel, it's fine to make money. So when you, on the contrary, and I think we've seen many, many companies that wouldn't do business with us unless they see how we make money, right? So they would say, why would you even trust having you in such a crucial part of the solution if we are not sure that you're going to keep it and it's going to be sustainable because you're not going to make enough money? At some point, you're going to tell us, we're not going to service you anymore. We're only going to make you part of this solution if we know that this is profitable for you. And it's logical, it makes sense. So transparency makes a big difference. In sales situation, transparency in the early stage, transparency can actually get you much closer to a close because they see exactly. And be honest with the transparency. The last thing is also how genuine you are within the organization. And really having the discussion within the organization that you really care about the customers will increase your chances. It's just how it goes through the space. I don't know how it works. But if you really care about the customers, somehow they feel it. I'll stop here and open for questions. You better have questions. I came all the way to Jerusalem. Yes?
Yeah, I think throughout your
didn't answer what?
Yuval, throughout your takeaways from all these years as an entrepreneur, you didn't mention competition to the extent I would expect. Like, what is the impact of competition on the landscape that you see when you go out there and try to sell your solution into the marketplace?
So I would say competition, the analogy of competition is like gravity. I don't wake up in the morning and wishing I could jump higher if it was on the moon. Competition is validation that there's a market. It's something that's a point of reference that you can know how you can get better. It's typically when the competition is coming from another Israeli company that's become emotional, right? But if it's not Israeli company, then competition is just important part of business. There's no reason to be emotional about it. It's really, you need to cold-blooded analyze it, see what they're good at, how you can be better, and live with it. Competition is really important. If there's no competition, you should be worried, right? I would say if you look at fintech specifically, and it is a very good example, right? So if you look at fintech, and we went to Amazon to compete on Amazon against other companies who provide payments. If there was no other payment companies that are not banks, we would never win, right? So in many ways, the competition creates a market. It was unacceptable to use non-banks for payments 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Because there's a critical mass of payment companies, suddenly they will meet you. So in many ways, the competition is not necessarily a bad thing. But by all means, there's no reason to be like either hate them or be emotional about it. It's an important part of business. It's fair. It's fair competition. The unfair situation, typically not coming from competition, is when you work with a bank, and then in all the banks, they have like a compliance or Visa or MasterCard, they have a compliance officer. And those compliance officers can make capricious, random decision that can finish companies overnight. And it's just random. And it's not competition, it's your serve, right? So Visa, ex-Visa is here, whatever. So if Visa allow companies to do acquiring, and then one day they decided to go out of acquiring, for some reason from of a niche, then they destroy the whole industry. And it's not competition, it's the service provider. But you finish. So it's not the competition that I would be worried about. It's the force majeure of coming from either regulators or middle management in banks or institutions that you work with. This kills a lot of companies. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Yuval. I think
think
we'll
was
do
about-
other questions later.
Yeah.
We're starting to be really out of time. So.